Hi, Leanne Donahue-Tamplin here. Today I interviewed Karen Willis. Karen is the Executive Officer of Rape and Domestic Violence Services Australia, and she's worked in the area of violence against women for over 30 years. In fact, she's received the Medal of the Order of Australia for this work. She's a board member on Women's Health New South Wales. She's the New South Wales representative of the National Association of Services Against Sexual Assault, and she's a member of the New South Wales Domestic and Family Violence and Sexual Assault Council. I hope you enjoy my interview with Karen Willis. So Karen, can you start by telling me a little bit about your background and your current role?
Okay, I'm the Executive Officer of Rape and Domestic Violence Services Australia. Our organisation has been providing counselling support face-to-face and telephone and online to those who've experienced sexual assault and domestic violence for 45 years.
Yeah.
I've been the Executive Officer here for 16 years, I think now.
Right.
And prior to that, I've worked in other organisations for the last 40 years where sexual assault, domestic violence and child abuse have been our key or core areas of work.
Well, do you know, I used to work at New South Wales Sexual Assault Services, and I'm a psychologist, and when I did that, I think there was only one other psychologist in the state. Everyone was a social worker, or I think without qualifications, as you just, or something else, social welfare or something.
And actually, people would have looked a bit funny when you said you were a psychologist.
Oh, yeah, I was kind of a bit on the outside. Yeah. So I think that's
changed. We have a lot to learn from that area of science, and I mean, most of our clinical work is based on the research and evidence that, brilliant psychologists, the likes of, she's actually a psychiatrist, Judith Herman, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
Groundbreaking work that we can't ignore. And, some of the ones that didn't do such a good job either. There was a few out there that weren't exactly beneficial to women, but that doesn't mean you still can't learn from that work, and then put your feminist analysis and your human rights analysis and trauma analysis over that to then understand how we can make the best of it.
Yeah. So can you, just to kind of explore the issue of violence against women, and I guess I'm combining sexual assault, domestic violence in that. Why do you think it's happening so frequently in our society?
Oh, we know it's because of gender inequity. In the 70s we called it patriarchy. Now it's gender inequity. It's the same devil with a different coat over it. What we know is that women hold second-class citizenship in a whole range of different areas, and everywhere from individual interactions where in relationships and families there might be a strict sex role stereotyping concept that men are in charge, men have the power, certainly ideas about ownership by men of women and children, senses of entitlement, those sorts of things. And that's not to say that all men are bad. I need to, most men are quite ethical in their relationships with women, but it's the social constructs in which we live, and it's the concept of masculinity. Men have to be tough and, run the show and all of that sort of stuff. Well, actually, no, they don't. And together we could probably do a much better job. And in fact, every time there is an example of where men and women working together, guess what? It works out really well.
Yeah.
So in that individual environment, those ideas about sense of entitlement, men being in charge, men being powerful, and women being subservient, and unfortunately they're still there in our society. At a family level, there might be strict sex role stereotyping, concepts that boys will be boys, that boys can be aggressive and pushy, and girls should be polite and nice. Forget that, right? Move on. Then at a community level, again, where there might be sex role stereotyping. I remember in younger years, my then partner and I had moved into an area where there was a rural bushfire service. And so they came and approached us about joining, and he was offered a job driving the trucks, and I was offered a job in the kitchen making sangers.
Yes.
What's the crazy part about it is I was the one with the truck driving licence. Talk in the family, so sex role stereotyping, again, concepts around men have to be tough and assertive, and also poor responses when men do use violence. So we've seen some of that in some of our sporting arenas where there has been violence against women, and there really has been not a commiserate response, I would have suggested. And then at a society level, where again there's acceptance of violence, there's not condoning of violence against women, there's not a review of everything from policies and practice to legislation to look at the impact on gender. So what we have is a society that has all its policies and practices and processes based on the wants and needs and dreams and outcomes and goals of white middle-class, middle-aged men. And that's great for them, good on them.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of us?
Yeah.
And then also, of course, poor response when violence occurs. So in Australia at the moment, we have a less than 1% conviction rate when it comes to sexual assault. I mean,
less than 1%. See, I say 3%. Less than 1%. 3.
Yeah. Now, part of that is that we have a less than 20% reporting rate. So in the first instance, it's the most underreported crime, all crimes. But even when it is reported, between reporting to police and getting to court, there is a massive dropout rate. And at court, we're looking at about a 55% conviction rate compared to an 80 to 85% conviction rate in all other crimes.
Right.
Now, for all of those reasons, there's lots of background and lots of reasons. We be here for a week and I would drive everyone nuts talking. But so it's those problems across the board that create a second-class citizenry for women and create an environment where those who think violence is okay can then use that against women and children. Power and control, all of those sorts of things.
It's interesting the Time's Up movement has, raised that issue, and I know that's more about sexual harassment in the workplace than sexual assault, but it's raised that issue of is a person who commits these crimes, do you then say, well, I hate everything about them and everything they do, because these are celebrities, do I never watch their movies again? Do they go away from their TV shows, and I think it's an interesting dilemma for people, isn't it? That they can do that at home in private, but they're actually this fabulous person. So it causes challenges then, I think, for people, even in legal circumstances, when they're looking at someone and saying, oh, but he's this great straight-laced guy in his suit and, he's not this type of person, when he's actually been doing those things.
And that comes down to we have this black and white or good and evil view of the universe, and that people are either really good or really bad or evil. And actually no one, all of us have times in our life where we do things where we look like, oh, was that really me? And then other times, all human beings have the capacity to do the most amazing and wonderful things. Most of us plod along somewhere in the middle for most of the time. Regardless of whether it's a celebrity or someone who is great in a whole stack of other areas or just your ordinary Joe Bloggs. I certainly, the idea of, lock them up, throw away the key, ignore them, they're just so-and-so's, forget it, and all of that sort of stuff is a really easy emotional response to their behaviours. But I think as people working in the industry, we've had to put our heart on hold and stick our head in place. And the concept that if we ignore a person's behaviour or just completely ostracise them and make them go away, that doesn't change their behaviour. And the outcome of that is that their future partners will likely continue to be our clients. So if we can get them to change their behaviour, then that's actually a good thing for their future clients, but also for their influence on other men. So that's really the critical first step. And one of the things that we have lots of discussions with in workplaces, for example, is they talk about, if we find out someone is using sexual harassment or sexual assault or domestic violence, we're just going to sack them. And I say, look, I can understand the view, and certainly we know that people who use sexual harassment in the workplace are quite often likely to use violence against women in a whole range of other circumstances. It's part of the continuum. So that's one option. But really what you're doing is just putting the problem that you've identified out there for someone else to manage. So perhaps The other way to think about it is you engage with that person and assist them to access or direct them. I don't mind directing. Direct them or direct through the courts them to access and engage in behaviour change so that they can seek to understand the impact of their behaviours, why they engage in those behaviours, and alternative ways of managing the things that they might indicate are triggers and alternative ways of behaving.
Yeah.
Now, what that means is if everybody does their little bit in seeking to change these men's behaviours, we will get a mass behaviour change movement.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if we have all the ethical men out there looking at the way masculinity operates in our country, looking at gender inequity, looking at what things they can do, and one of the challenges that we throw out when we speak to groups of men is we say, look, we know you guys are ethical, we know you guys don't do this stuff, but just not doing it is not good enough anymore. You actually have to take the next step. So the challenge is, in the next week, I want each and every one of you to do two things. Number one is identify something that contributes to gender inequity. So it might be a sex role stereotyping concept in your house, it might be a policy in your workplace, it might be something that you see on the street. Doesn't matter, it can be little, can be big, doesn't matter. Just identify one thing that contributes towards gender inequity in our society and do something about it. The second thing is challenge your mate to do the same. Then, once you've had practice, do it again next week and the week after and the week after, the same two things. Can you imagine the tsunami of impact on society and on masculinity and on constructs of male if all of us did that?
Yeah.
Two little things, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, Victoria Falls starts as a little rain shower up somewhere in the mountains of Angola, and look what it becomes. We could actually do this, and we could do it in generation.
Yeah. Look, that lends itself to my next question, which is, what do you think the general public needs to know about violence against women?
I think when we think about violence against women, we often go to the extreme end. We often think about walking down the street and seeing a bloke sexually assaulting or belting up a woman. Now, sometimes that will happen, but that's actually fairly rare. Most who use violence in their relationships, one of the three things they look for is ability to manipulate the person into a location where they can commit the act without interruption or witness. That sort of violence that women experience is in their homes, it's behind closed doors, it's in cars, it's in places where there are not witnesses. So that's fairly unlikely to occur. But what people can do is look at their own attitudes and beliefs. So, for example, we might be listening to a TV report and there'll be something about someone experiencing sexual assault. Often our default response is, where were they, what they were doing, how are they drinking, had they been taking drugs, what were they wearing, had they had sex before, had they had sex with that person before, and did they say no? Because, the average sex offender really listens to that.
Yeah.
20 questions and doubts and victim blaming ideas before we decide whether we're going to believe this person is telling us they've experienced the most appalling of crimes. So next time we have that reaction, pull ourselves up, give ourselves a stern talking to and say no. If this person was saying, my car just got knocked off, we go, oh, you poor thing.
Yeah.
Whereas we know that overwhelmingly cars are knocked off for bloody insurance purposes.
Yeah.
But we don't go there. We go, oh, you poor thing.
Yeah.
Let's be the same when it comes to sexual assault. Yeah. Or next time we see a little girl and tell instead of saying, oh, aren't you a pretty little thing? How about we say, how clever are you? What a smart girl you are. Next time we send our 16-year-old boys and girls out for a fun night out, instead of saying to the boys, oh, go out and have a good night, son, whoa, and to the girls, oh, have you got money? Have you got this phone call? Don't do here, don't do that, 10, 20 million warning. Actually, give them both those safety warnings, but also tell them both to go out and have a great time and enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
Every single time we do something that adds to that sex role stereotyping, the condoning and acceptance of violence, the idea that women are the ones who have to manage or avoid the poor behaviours of others. Every time we do something, what we're just doing is condoning at the pointy end of that violence against women. So let's challenge ourselves, challenge our friends. Next time we're with our mates, take 5 minutes out and say, okay, let's have a think about this. What can we do as a group? And then go on with partying and yahooing and doing whatever you're planning on doing. Like, I'm not talking about you have to spend your whole life going, oh, whoa, you know, what can I do? But just set aside some time to do it and be vigilant.
Reflect.
Reflect and reflect. Have a bit of a read. Look at some fact sheets.
Yeah.
Talk in appropriate places in our work. Talk to our diversity units. Talk to our HR. Be part of the solution. By being quiet, we're just being part of the problem.
Yeah. So would you say then that in terms of reducing the actual incidents, because I'm very aware of how much work's being done, particularly in terms of providing services and acceptance, you know, a lot of work's being done from a government-funded perspective. But how do we actually reduce the rate of occurrence? Is it that you're suggesting that tsunami type, you know, we start with the small trickles and gradually change that inequity across the board?
Because we know that the cause is gender inequity, changing that, and those 4 pillars that support gender inequity is, you know, the individual, the family, the community and society, changing the things there that will actually reduce gender inequity, and that over time will reduce violence against women. So we certainly need, on the other side of that, to ensure that we have proper services, supports and responses in place for when someone experiences the violence, and also a responsive criminal justice system that supports people to seek redress for the violence that they've experienced. Absolutely. There's no question those things need to be in place, and that we need to continue to improve and expand and make accessible and accountable and transferable and evidence-based and all of those sorts of things, those things. There's no question about that. Yeah. But the problem that we have is that by the time those services kick in, the violence has already become part of that person's life story.
Yeah. So
if we can prevent it, that's a much better thing. So I'm not for 1 minute suggesting we shouldn't do the post stuff, and that when an incident occurs, we shouldn't put every effort into making sure that that offender doesn't do that again. Absolutely. But what would be marvellous is if we saw 25% of our expenditure, and that be adequate, so probably more than we're spending at the moment, to say the least, go into that post-violence response, but 75% of our resources and commitment go into preventing. And we work in our workplaces, in our schools, in our community groups, in our families, at our leadership level. You know, a couple of years ago when Malcolm Turnbull first got the job, 10 days into his prime ministership, his first policy announcement was around violence against women. And that's when he said, you know, while he talked about respect and disrespect is a baseline for violence to occur. Within 3 hours of his speech, we had a 7% increase in calls to our service.
Were you kidding?
Now, that never went back to ground zero. It did come back down, but it never went back to ground zero. And what that really did for us is what we did know, but what really showed to us is the importance of leadership in this space. When our leaders are standing up and saying this stuff is unacceptable, and people who have these experiences have the right to support and recovery, people listen. So our leaders in political, our leaders in sports, our leaders in community, our leaders in the workplace, they have a crucial role as well in saying this stuff is not okay, and we all need to be doing something about it. So, look, I think it's really easy to, well, it's not easy because when we need to do it a lot better than we do, but it is really easy to focus on the post-event. Yes. And then often what we're doing also is focusing on the person who experienced the violence. Yes, certainly helping them to recover, but, you know, they're doing all the hard work there. What we need to do is look the pre-violence and stop it before it starts. Yeah.
Do you think is there an area that we're doing particularly well in? What do you think?
Look, I think there's lots of stuff we do really well in this country. You know, we get, and, you know, I'm not going to back off from advocating for improvements to changes, but I've been fortunate enough through a number of different circumstances to travel overseas to have a look at how other countries in the first world respond to sexual assault and domestic violence and what their laws and criminal justice responses. And certainly there's bits that different countries do really well. But to be perfectly honest, overwhelmingly, we do it pretty damn good in this country. Yeah. that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be improving. So in terms of our counselling responses, we know that the impact is trauma. We know about the stage-based recovery. Thank you, Judith Herman, for her incredible work. We know about the appropriate therapeutic interventions, whether it's in a contemplation preparation for safety stage, through establishment of safety, trauma processing and reconnection. We know those stages. We know what the therapeutic interventions are. We can work with people on that. We know the shocking impacts that experiencing sexual assault in childhood has, and then the subsequent violence that people will often experience throughout their lives, and how complex trauma can just make such an appalling mess of somebody, and how hard that is and how long that is to help them recover. But we do know that people can recover. So that stuff's really good. We know from the police that when people go, that a good quality response by police that is believing and supportive is actually just as important as anything else. We always talk to people who contact us about reporting to police. And more, compared to 40 years ago where people go, yeah, not in a million years, to now overwhelmingly we will have people say, yeah, look, I have, or I've already been through a court case or whatever. And we will get comments like, my matter fell over or it didn't go anywhere. But, the detective was the best human being in the universe. Sometimes we don't always get that, but where it is, people will then express satisfaction in the system. They know that the system did everything it could to achieve justice for them. The other side of that is that overwhelmingly the reason that people report to police is they'll say things along the lines of, some will say he had no right to do that to me. No, good on you, that's exactly what we want to hear. But most will say, look, what happened to me, it's too late to change that. But if I can stop him from doing that to someone else, then I will. And you sort of think for that altruistic motive, we can put people through hell in that criminal justice response. So I think we certainly need to do, I'm a big advocate for specialist courts, and hopefully before I retire and die or whatever, we might actually get to see those things in place. You got to have some bucket list, haven't you? This is my bucket list. But there's lots of things along the way. We do things really well, but we can never sit on our laurels. We can never just accept, 9 out of 10 times we score, so we'll just leave that alone. No, we have to make sure that we get it to 10. And then once we've got it to 10, can we get there quicker and better? And we can never not stop looking at what the evidence tells us, what the research tells us, how we can improve our responses, what things we can do to ensure that those who've experienced the most appalling of violence can recover and get on with their lives. I just need to say recovery doesn't mean forgetting. Anyone who's experienced domestic violence or sexual assault will never forget that experience. But recovery means getting to the point in their life where that is an experience in their life, no longer something that controls and dominates their life. And that's absolutely possible, of course.
So are you hopeful that incident rate will reduce?
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's funny, like in terms of the recorded incident rates, I'm hopeful it will go up. I want it to go through the roof.
So people start reporting.
That's exactly it, because we have a less than 20% reporting rate. So once a year, the New South Wales Bureau of Crime statistics come out and we see an increase in sexual assault and domestic violence, and I will get reporters saying, oh my God, this is terrible, what's going on? I'm going, yes, this is a good news story. More people are coming forward. There's no evidence to suggest that we're seeing an increase in violence against women. Unfortunately, there's also no evidence to suggest we're seeing a reduction. But what we are seeing is an increase in those who've experienced such violence saying they've got no right to do this to me, and I will seek redress for what's happened. And that's a great outcome. And I think, things like the Me Too campaign is certainly part of that. And I think what will start to happen more, and I'm really looking forward to this, is particularly with sexual harassment, that women will consider taking civil actions against institutions who don't do the right thing. Now, what we know happens with civil actions is it's going to cost the institution money. Now, there will be a small group in those institutions who are appalled by behaviour and want it to stop. There will be a much bigger group who are scared about the bottom line. From my perspective, I actually don't care what the motivating factor is if they actually then do something to ensure that institution increases gender equity, reduces the incidence of sexual harassment, and ensures that women have equal rights in that location, whatever that location may be. Whatever the motivating factor is, I don't care, as long as it happens.
So do you think that's been one of the big benefits of the Me Too movement, is kind of highlight that gender inequity in organisations and make people be accountable for it?
Absolutely. I mean, why should someone go to work to do a job, to earn a quid, to do the right thing by their employer, but also to be able to feed their family or go on holidays or buy a car or whatever it is, or just basically eat, and then in that process have to put up with sleaze and comments and all the stuff that people have put, where in the universe is that okay?
Yeah. And
unfortunately, what we also see is that what is often called sexual harassment has actually become indecent assault. So we'll get calls from people who'll say, I've been sexually harassed in the workplace, but then they will talk about inappropriate touching.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not sexual harassment. That's actually indecent assault.
Yeah, right.
Sexual harassment was the precursor. The other part of it is that people will often talk about how they can manage or avoid behaviour.
Yeah.
One of the things that women are socialised to do is to accept responsibility for what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all part of our job as the carers and the makers of happy families and all of those sorts of things. And so when something goes wrong, our default is, how can I change it? How can I manage it? How can I make it different? Mm-hmm. When it comes to predators, you can't. It's actually the responsibility. The responsibility for behaviour is absolutely with them. And we know, for example, like things like protection orders in domestic violence are reasonably successful. In about 70 to 80%, they actually stop the violence.
Yeah.
And that's because what you've got is a bigger bully bullying the bully.
Yeah.
The bully's on your side.
Yes.
And that stops the violence. So workplaces, you don't think that you have to manage it yourself, or that you have to try and change it, or that you're in any way responsible for what's occurred. Go to the bosses, and if it's the bosses, go to the board, and if it's the board, go to the lawyers and jump up and down and say, I don't have to put up with this. This is my job. I'm doing it well, and I should be allowed to do that without having to put up with that.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Karen. I appreciate your time. Have a great day.
You too.